All right. You sure?
Welcome, everybody. I'm Corinne Shippert.
I'm Marcus Collins from MA Properties.
And we are here to present tonight's Buyer's Masterclass. So without further ado, Marcus, let's get this thing rolling. I know people are busy and they want this information.
So, why do we do this? Well, if you think of it this way, that buying and selling, specifically this evening we're focused on buying, it's really too important to leave to chance. So what we do throughout all of the educational pieces that we put together is really try to educate both buyers and sellers. And that's really the crux of our organization, really. We really do want to educate people so that they become the smartest people at the closing table. That's kind of our tagline in some ways. So, what are we going to talk about this evening? Well, the whole buying process, really, from soup to nuts, really. We'll talk about smart decisions, a little bit about what's happening with the market, what the process, how you should approach it, certainly at the beginning, how to set up what's buying in this market like, how should you set up your search? And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of offers. What is the process by which you get from, I'd like to write an offer on this home, all the way through to, guess what? The closing table. So we'll talk about the offer. And then we'll finish it off with a little bit around buying during COVID. Get some of Corinne's take on what it's like to be out there today. When we're recording this, we're in the middle of the spring market. So what's it like to be out there today when you're looking to buy? So that's what we're going to talk about this evening.
Sounds great.
Why don't we have a quick talk around smart decisions? So what do we mean by that, and what are we about here? Well, it's really about taking information that is relatively easy to find today and putting some context to it. It's all very well hearing the term that inventory is low, but what does that actually mean? And is it low in many respects? So there's a lot of questions to be answered, and what we like to do is not just show you the information, but really put some analysis behind that, what's happening in the wider context, as well as what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So that's really what smart decisions are about. In terms of, where do I find this stuff? Well, let me go over there, excuse me. Where do we find it? So every year we produce 2 market reviews, one in Lexington and one in Arlington. Cram-packed full of useful information, lots of graphs, lots of analysis within this, really giving you in-depth information about what happened, and specifically in terms of 2020, what was the impact of COVID? That's what everybody wants to know. What did COVID mean in this environment? And it's all within these 2. You can find them on our website. You can reach out to us and we will give you more. We're going to put them in the mail to you. Or you can just look on our website where we have lots of, in many cases, some up-to-date information about what's going on. But there's a lot of information in here about the impact of COVID, specifically 2020, and then our predictions for 2021.
And also, I just wanted to add, these are for Arlington and Lexington. So if you're looking in other towns, we have about 50 towns on our website with statistics that Marcus, who's our stats guru, has compiled over many, many years. And the interpretation of that data is actually there. It's written out. Marcus has put it all together for you, and it reads like a story. It's really helpful. And so we can guide you on that, but you can also play around and look at what we have there. So, yeah.
As well as that, you missed it, but it's still on YouTube. Last night, I did about a 40-minute overview of both Lexington and Arlington, looking at what happened in 2020, and then bringing it back right up to date to see what's happening, right now as we are in the middle of the spring market. I do that every month. So if you're interested about what's going, look at what I did last night. But also every month I go in, update it, a little bit of context for 2020, but then start to bring it up to date as the data rolls in month on month. We can begin to make some more accurate predictions about what 2021 will bring. In terms of what happened in 2020, overall we saw a similar number of sellers in the market. They didn't decline, they didn't increase, it was a similar number of sellers overall. A little bit of a change in terms of, if you remember back to the March, April timeframe in 2020, almost nothing came on the market. So there was a change in the shape of the way that homes came on, the distribution of when homes came on. But overall, we got a similar number of sellers in 2020 as we had seen in 2019. Excuse me. What we did see, though, is an increased number of buyers in the market. And, fast forward to 2021, we're seeing that today as well. A lot of buyers in the market, perhaps with a slight shift in terms of their criteria with working from home, needing a slightly larger home, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. But definitely an increased number of sellers in the market. And the market shifted, if you can remember back to 2019, seems like a long time ago, pre-COVID, there was a lot of discussion around there being an economic downturn. Turns out it did happen in Q1 of 2020, but that perception of a downturn meant that we shifted to something of a softening seller's market. But as we came through to 2020, so that changed, became very much a seller's market as more buyers came into the market. Positive price appreciation, and the only thing, with the exception of the way that when homes came on the market, the condo market took a little bit of a dip in the second half of 2020. A lot of condos came on the market, and there was a little bit of reticence, if you like, on the part of the buyers thinking around that, is shared space. Do I really want to be in shared space? On the other hand of that, of course, condominiums are cheaper than single family. So they were torn a little bit between, yes, I've got a share space, which I'm not too keen on, but guess what? I can afford them. So there was a little bit of tension, but we did see a slight slowing down in the condo market second half of 2020. Fast forward, 2021. I think you would agree, Corinne, there's a lot of buyers in the market.
There's so many buyers in the market right now. A lot of people trying to find their next place. It's very competitive right now. We're at the beginning of the season. Marcus is going to fill you in on what we think is going to happen for the rest of the year. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I like to split it buyers and sellers. Buyers specifically, there are a large number of buyers in the market, more than we've seen historically, I think. And some of that is not needing to live in central Boston, for example, or close into Boston, because they're only going to be commuting in maybe 2-3 days a week. Today, they're probably not at all, but even if that changes over the next 1 to 2 years, they'll be commuting in less. So commute becomes less important. Size of home becomes more important. And so that, I think, is what's driving much of the increase in the buyers in the market today. So more buyers in the market in 2021 than we saw previously.
Not your typical step up that we see. Usually there are points in people's lives where they're looking to move, and there's always the relocation people, but just having that dramatic change in how people function in their homes is a driver of a large number of these buyers.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're right. You're right. Normally, there's that they move up when they haven't got enough space, or they want a different school system. Now it's I'm moving because I don't need the lifestyle I had previously, and that's happening en masse essentially.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of the sellers, if you look at, for example, Arlington, there were roughly the same number of sellers in the market in 2020 as there were in 2019. Will that change in 2021? It seems unlikely. So overall, we will see our predictions for 2021 are a similar number of listings, similar number of sellers as we saw in 2020 and in 2019, but a larger number of buyers in the market. And so it's going to move very much to a seller's market as those buyers compete for what is essentially not enough inventory. That's where they kind of are right now. So 2021 will be, it has been, as far as we've got today, but will continue to be something of a tough market for buyers. And that's really the emphasis really on this presentation is, what are smart strategies that you can use to be successful in a very competitive market that we currently find ourselves in.
Yeah.
So.
And they want to know, Marcus, so let's get this thing rolling. So,
all right, so smart process. What do we mean? First thing really is, what exactly am I looking for? That's kind of key, I think, in this market.
Exactly. So as we've said, some of these things have shifted, but let's just outline what the key components are. So commute played a larger factor, I would say, before COVID, or let's say it plays a different factor now. So as people are working from home more, even if they're going back to work, there's a high likelihood that they're not going back to work 5 days a week. And so they're willing to commute a little bit longer to get to their job. So, you know, if they're trying to go into Cambridge and they wanted to be in, say, in Arlington or Lexington, now they're actually willing to be further out. So people are looking in Acton and Westford, Sudbury, Wayland. I mean, there's a lot of towns that we're actually working in now that we hadn't been working in as much. People are just going out further. They're looking for more space. And so the commute, I would say the commute is like a huge driver at this point of what where people are willing to live. And also the public transportation issue, just how many people are going into Boston. It seems like the commuter rail and all of that just doesn't have the same buzz that it did 2 years ago. It used to be such a big deal. I need to be next to the train. And it seems like people aren't even mentioning that as much anymore. And then the next thing that's a big driver is schools. So if you're someone who uses the school system, obviously you're going to be looking at what kind of town you want to have your children in. You're going to be paying for that if you're going to towns that have excellent school systems. And so you're weighing that with the commute, the schools, and the school system. If you don't have kids, then the school system is something that you may not want to pay for. Although we do think that towns that have excellent school systems are a little more blue chip. They tend to stay high when the market fluctuates. If you see a dip in the market, like what we saw in the Great Recession, 2007, 8, 9, when it came back, the towns that had the excellent school systems, they bounced back very quickly. Some of them almost didn't see a dip, but the ones that didn't have as good school systems, or the ones that were further out from the city, they took actually years longer to come back to pre-recession prices. So school system is one of the key drivers for a large number of the buyers. And then affordability is the last one, just how much space and what kind of home are you buying for the money. Now people are really changing the emphasis. They're looking at yard a lot more, and it doesn't necessarily mean they want large yard, but it seems like the barbecue outdoor component has taken on a different meaning now. People want to be able to make sure they can have people come and be outside, and I think that lifestyle is here to stay. So the yard part is playing a new factor, I would say. Or, I mean, it's been there, but I think the millennials also have a barbecue culture, which is kind of fun. And so we see that when people are looking for homes.
Cool. Needs versus wants.
So
you got to do it.
I'm not going to say it. No, you do need to differentiate between what you want to have and what you must have. And so we really, when we do a search, we really strip it down to what is the minimum requirement and what is the maximum you can pay. And those sort of define the parameters in a way. So for your must-haves, you're looking at, what are the towns that have the schools that you want, and what is the circumference of the commute that is tolerable to you, and your lifestyle and your family. And then just in terms of space, what is the minimum number of bedrooms that you're looking for, the minimum number of bathrooms, do you need a garage, do you need office space, those kind of things. And then being realistic about what your wish list is. So you can have that list there, and it's great to look at that, but you're going to be looking at a fair amount of houses, and you do want to keep your eye on the key components, making sure that you're at least ticking those off the box. And then if you can get the wish list, great. And if you don't get it, sometimes you can actually add it yourself. So it's nice to be creative and put that hot tub in, Marcus.
Right, exactly. Expand the bathroom, whatever it may be. But you're right. Focus on the must-haves.
Yeah. So, and then another thing that's important is to include the relevant decision makers from the start. So if you're, say, a couple and there's two of you and one of you is really busy, it's good to include that person and not just have one person just come in at the last minute. And especially if you're talking about people who are in your family who are out of town and specifically out of state, the price of housing in the Boston area can be a big sticker shock for people from other regions. And so it's nice to have people from your family, if they're involved, on the same page. So at the last minute, they're not putting the kibosh on something that you've done a lot of work to get to that point where you want to put in an offer.
Financially.
Yes, and I think I was implying that, Marcus, but
Establish your budget came right out of that one, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So
how do you establish your budget? When should you do that?
So part of your search is defined by what you can afford. So understanding that from the start is really, really basic. And how you determine what that is approach a lender and get pre-approved for a mortgage if you're having a mortgage. And so what the lender will do is define what is the highest purchase price that you can buy, the highest purchase price of the home that you are qualified to buy. And this is important because the person who's deciding who is going to get to buy that house is actually the seller. And so they're looking at the credentials of the buyers, making sure that they're sound financially. And so they want to see how much you're approved for, but they also want to see what percentage you're borrowing to see how strong a buyer you are. And you're going to submit that when you put your offer in. And don't worry about getting a lender that you want to work with for the long haul or for the whole transaction. Ultimately, the person who is going to issue your pre-approval letter, they're doing it for free. They're doing it because they want to introduce themselves and maybe hopefully get your business. But really, once you have your offer accepted, you have a time to shop around. So that's how you're going to establish your budget. But the key about the pre-approval is it's a number that you have to take a little bit further. You do need to look at what your monthly payment is. And so a lot of people, especially if you're coming out of a renting situation, and you have a sense of what your number is, you need to make sure that the monthly payment is comfortable. And if you hear that it's higher than what you want, talk to the person who issued the pre-approval and have them adjust the amount of the purchase price that you're qualified for so that it's affordable for you in the monthly.
So key not to expect, if they give you a $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 pre-approval, feel free to kind of scale that back.
Absolutely. People will give you credit all the time. They do it with credit cards, they'll do it with loans. And so with the mortgage, it's one thing to get it. The other thing is living with it. And so when you're buying a home and it's for 30 years and your house, they call it house poor, where you can't afford to eat out or do any things that you want because you bought this incredible home, and guess what? You're going to sit home and enjoy it.
Right. Can't afford to go out, right?
Yeah. Let's see. Is there anything else on that? So considering the cost of owning versus renting, when you're thinking about buying, you really want to be in that home at least 5 years. There's a transaction cost to selling a home, and so you need to look at that. And then also, there's just maintenance cost to owning a home. You obviously have the taxes and all that stuff. That's sort of calculated into your monthly when you're talking to the lender, but there are costs that you have as a homeowner that you definitely won't have as a renter, because that's what's included in your rent, and your mortgage payment does not include all the maintenance costs. And oftentimes, if you're renting, sometimes even your utilities are included in that. So you've got to sort of tease those out a little bit.
Right, and there's also a timing question here as well. We said it's a very competitive market, and inevitably that means competition means somewhat higher pricing. Perhaps you're going to be paying a little bit more than you anticipated paying. It may well be that if you're only going to be owning for 2 years, if your the time span can only stretch out 1 to 2 years, maybe renting is the right option.
Yeah, for
sure. You really need to be thinking, if you are thinking much longer term, then yes, clearly ownership is the best route. But if you're thinking, well, in 2 years I anticipate moving, then maybe renting is the other one another thing to think about too. So there's the additional cost, but there's also the timing pieces of this as well, I think, which is important to consider.
Definitely. Yeah.
So,
what's next, Marcus?
Buyer's agents.
Okay.
The role of the buyer's agents, and in a moment we'll compare that with the role of the listing agent too.
So, and let's just clarify. So a real estate agent can be a buyer's agent. A real estate agent can be a listing agent. Some people do both. Some people are exclusively a listing agent or a buyer's agent. And so just to say, so you're coming in as a buyer, and so you're looking for someone who's going to be acting in the role as your buyer's agent, and they are working for you. Agents have a fiduciary responsibility to you, the buyer, to make sure that they're acting in your interest, not in theirs, certainly not in the interest of the seller. And so the buyer's agent is there essentially to help you understand the market, to help you find the right home, to help you with the search. They're bringing in their experience from all the sales they've done before, the clients they've worked with, the issues they've seen. And there's a lot of stuff that comes up that if you're not an agent, you can't even imagine the complexities that buying a home can have. And so as a buyer's agent, we work to educate you as much as we can But then we're also there just having your back and making sure at every turn that you have that kind of counsel. And so the other things we do, we manage the search, we educate you on the actual local market. Our company is actually great at that because of Marcus, because of all the stats that you do, but I feel like we have something that is tangible that we can actually show people how different towns are different from one another in terms of like price or, just different I don't know, I guess stats.
Right.
Analytics. We're able to analyze the market for you because of these stats that we have, which is really, really helpful as a buyer's agent. And then once you have once you've chosen the house that you want, we help you craft a strong offer, and then we help you from the accepted offer all the way through to closing. And so there's a lot of different points. We help manage your inspection and help you negotiate that. We help you get to the purchase and sales agreement, and then we help carry you all the way through to closing. And we're a great resource. We know the area, we're local. I personally live in Arlington. I've been there for 25 years. I know everybody on our team has really deep community roots and understands what each of the towns offers. Our team is in Lexington, but we have people in Bedford, we have people in Burlington. So in any case, the point is that we live here, but we also work with buyers who end up maybe starting, and maybe we meet them at a listing that we have, and all of a sudden when they get to their home search, they're now on the North Shore, or they might be, an hour west, or they might be half an hour south, or even in the city. And so you can actually look at our experience map and you'll see that we work in all different towns. And so as a buyer's agent, we are a great resource because we know how all these towns differ. And we understand the market trends and the housing stock in different areas. And we understand the sort of the lay of the land of all the different contractors and giving you the resources for that. So, and then the last part is just how do you pay for a buyer's agent? The answer is kind of a yes, no. So you are buying the house, but the seller is the one who's paying it. But ultimately you end up paying for it whether you use it or not. So it's an advantage. You're entitled to have a buyer's agent when the seller is signing the listing paperwork. They're committing to pay the buyer's agent. So whether you use a buyer's agent or not, the seller is paying for it. What else to add about that, Marcus?
Tell me about the listing agent.
So the listing agent.
Juxtaposition those two roles, because many people, I think, are confused. What's the difference? And it says it in the first line.
And I think, people think, hey, there's a house, someone's selling it, there's the agent, I can buy the house from that agent. And the operative term would be from there, because they are there representing the seller. And again, they have a fiduciary responsibility as the listing agent to get the seller the highest price and the best terms for whatever it is that seller is specifically looking for. Typically, it's best price in a combination of terms to minimize risk. If you buy through the listing agent, which is something that comes up sometimes, people walk into an open house and they want to put an offer in with the listing agent, and they believe that it's going to get them an advantage, but it actually doesn't save the seller money, and it doesn't save you anything because you're not paying. And the commission that the buyer's agent is getting is actually contractually agreed upon from the listing agent. So the seller has to pay that amount. Mm-hmm. So
I think the key difference is, though, and it's in that first line as you mentioned there, Corinne, the buyer's agent works for you. The listing agent works for the seller. I mean, that's the key difference between the two. And really, the combination of the buyer's agent and the buyer is really what makes that dynamic duo, as we call it here.
Yeah, because we can't do it without you. We need to know what you're looking for, and I think ultimately the part that makes it fun for us as agents is we get to know our clients, and so we understand what they're looking for, and everybody has different aspirations. Their homes fit into that, and their choice of like community, and every buyer has sort of a different just a different life. Everybody's so different, and so we go on these journeys with our buyers looking for something that's always different. The challenges are always different, and at the end it always feels great. And so it really is a collaborative effort to get that house.
One way I often describe it is really as a you're a counselor, you're everything for a trusted advisor for the buyer, because it says there it's a huge investment that a buyer is making in buying a home, and you really need some expert advice when you do that, whatever large investment, and that's really where the buyer agent comes in. And it's my experience that, and we're looking at the way the agents on the team and Corinne as well, is it really becomes almost a friendship. At the end of it, you've spent so long with them, you understand exactly what they're looking for, and as you go on that journey, as you called it, from right at the beginning of not really understanding what your requirements are to getting you to the closing table. Once you get to that point, it's clear and everybody understands that both you and the buyer's agent, and your buyer's agent, know exactly that you bought the right house. Yeah. And that's the key thing.
And the road, sometimes it can be long and it can be bumpy, and it's always kind of interesting to me when you get to that point where the buyer or the buyers have moved into their home, and there's a big celebration with the friends and the family, and then you show up and you look at them and you know where you've been together, and it's not always easy. And
when you get there, though,
but you understand what went into getting that home, and it's really powerful, I would say.
So, a competitive environment. How do we stay one step ahead of our competition? That's the key, specifically in this environment, as we mentioned before, very competitive. So how do we do that?
Well, one is to understand the different ways that you can buy. So there's sort of two ways that you can buy, and we call it buying smart. And both of them have sort of different components. So one is, first off, let's consider what buyers want, and then we'll talk about how you would actually get what you want. So today's buyers, they really want a home that is turnkey, fresh, upgraded. Everybody is looking at Pinterest. They want it now. They don't want it in 5 years or 10 years. They want it now. Or they do want that home that is something they can invest in. They want that fixer-upper. And they do watch those shows where there's a lot of fixing up, and they think it's going to be fast, but it is a road, and it is a great way actually to build equity. But if you're going to do that, or let's say if a buyer does that, they definitely expect a discount, and they expect to build that equity when they're putting that work in.
So I want a fresh, updated house. How do I do that?
So this is something that's possible. But you're going to have to take on the competition. And so you have to sort of figure out what is the race that you want to run. And by that, I mean, if you're approved for, let's just say, $800,000, and you look at a town that in a very competitive, hot house, one of those turnkey houses, goes for 10% over or something like that, you need to kind of plan for that. So in that case, if you're an $800,000 buyer, you'd start looking for homes that are maybe like the 725 point. If you really want to make sure you can nail it, you're going into like the 600s, because then you're going to have that pre-approval and you'll have plenty of money to go higher. But this is very possible. When you want to take on the competition, the key on that kind of thing is to really do your due diligence and look at the comps, understand what the price is, be comfortable feeling like you're sticking your neck out a little bit, because that's really what you're doing. You're paying a little bit more, but maybe you're going to stay in that house for a long time. So when you're paying a little bit more over time, it's going to work out. But you do end up in bidding wars, and you need to write a really strong offer, and there's all these components that we'll go into in part. We don't give away those are sort of our agents' trade secrets. Everyone has sort of different ways they do it. So we'll share some of that. But bidding wars, when you're working with an agent, you just do it together. And you're very methodical about it in your search and also in putting in the offer. And if it's competitive, you go for it. And then at a certain point, if it's too hot, you just let it go on to the next house. Right. And the market does change seasonally. So for instance, right now it's very hot, really, really hot. And that's going to calm down in a couple of months. So, we're looking forward to that, because, bidding wars it's not for everyone. It really isn't for you. You do have to be ready to go for it and then let go. If you don't get it, and if you get it, be comfortable with what you're paying for it and saying this is where the market is at, because it is a reflection of the market. What you were saying, there's a lot more buyers than there are sellers, and that's where we're at.
Definitely. So now HGTV is all I ever watch on TV. Strategy number 2.
Yes, strategy number 2. So this is recognizing potential where others perhaps haven't. And so this is the classic good bones kind of house. You're looking for a house that has some of the things that really make living somewhere great. So you're looking for that location. You want to be in a certain town, a certain neighborhood, just a general vibe of where you're living. And then specifically for the house, again, the good bones. What's the flow? Having that layout that functions well. It doesn't have like weird kind of things happening, where the light's good, where you're in a location where amenities are there for you, and where the price is good. That's the kind of house that's great to buy and do some fixing up. And to do that, you're going to walk into some homes that you are going to have to really imagine it, because they're not going to it's not going to be empty. It's not going to be freshly painted. It's not going to be staged. It's not going to be digitally staged. It's going to look like your grandmother's house, or, you know, something. Maybe your grandmother has good taste, not to insult your grandmother. But you're going to have to see past clutter, outdated decorating. I guess that's what I was talking about, Marcus.
Yep. No, my grandmother's house had outdated. Definitely.
Inevitably. Everybody gets outdated unless you want to keep shopping for the rest of your life. Everybody gets outdated.
Indeed.
But, you know, you're going to have to see past clutter. And so we'll show you some pictures of this in a minute. But you're going to have to see past that. And that's where an agent is really helpful, because we can identify those houses for you. Like, you know, this weekend there's a few houses that are fixer-uppers in Arlington, and some of them have great bones, and you may not see it. And, you know, we can help tell you which ones are those great locations and help you imagine what it's like if you're going to take out all those trees and bushes and, you know, that kind of thing. It's a great way to increase equity. What I find the challenge with this approach, and we'll look at the houses, is that it's very hard to calculate what the cost of improving things are. And so you sort of have two buyers. So you have the buyers who are buying the hot house, and maybe it's a little bit more, but you know what your monthly is going to be for the next 30 years. You know, when you're buying the house, that's the fixer-upper. Depends how much you're going to fix up. You know, these projects can add up, and so that's where we come in to be able to help you identify what projects you're going to want to take on.
And what makes sense and what doesn't.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So, all right, before and afters. We love this section.
Don't we?
Yep.
Okay, so a lot of people walk in and see the wallpaper and bristle. But you can take it down, and the news on it is not as expensive as you think. I think buyers freak out. They think it's impossible to take down. It's not. It's not the easiest, but it's not the hardest. And certainly if you're working with a professional painting company, they just come in and rip this stuff down. So you going to do the reveal?
Yeah, why not?
So here we go.
By the way, this is the same room in the same house. So you can see the difference there, huge difference.
Well, you know, walking into this house, you know, you're in town, you get a sense of the housing stock, and you can see, you know, the detailed woodwork. You can see that it's got the great floors. You can see the ceilings actually in great shape. I'm looking at, you know, the molding, the placement of doors and windows, and how's that going to function. You know, dining room is pretty straightforward.
Looks really well.
Yeah,
yep.
Looks great.
Really well. Kitchens.
Okay, so kitchens. Kitchens, we see a lot of dark wood kitchens, or even, I guess, yeah, dark wood kitchens that are outdated. But painting the kitchen cabinets is a really cost-effective way to not have to redo your kitchen. I think one of the issues too is when you're moving into a home that you're getting the bones, you're getting the space, you're getting the layout and all this stuff. How many projects do you want to take on at the same time? Especially, you know, you have good jobs, you kind of understand how long it's going to take to be able to, you know, get your kitchen done. So you might buy a home that you really like. It functions in every single way, but it's not your dream kitchen. But it does look like the one here on the left, and you paint it, and it doesn't cost that much. And maybe you're not replacing, you know, the appliances. They're fine. Everything works. But you're good with this because you're now in the town you want. You've got the space you want. You're making your friends. You're commuting perfectly. Maybe you're using the school system. You're in to the house. And so this is the kind of thing that's great.
I also think you might do this to tide you over for the next 2 to 3 years.
Exactly.
It's not the end game. The end game is a new kitchen. But this will just kind of allow you to get into, as you say, get into the house, get into the town, tide you over for a couple of years, and then you can again go ahead and...
And before you go on, let's just... The secret is that we also have the Sellers Seminar. And in the Sellers Seminar, what we're telling sellers to do is to paint their kitchen cabinets. And the reason they're doing that is because buyers will pay so much more for a home that has the quote unquote updated kitchen. And a lot of times it is that kitchen on the left that has just been cleaned up and painted. And so for you might buy the house that is quote unquote turnkey, and actually that is the kitchen, right?
Yep, you're going to have
I mean,
it
we sell
anyway,
tons of houses like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Here's another example of a kitchen. It's exactly the same idea here. Slightly different floor, but basically it was painted. So very easy to do.
Things like changing out the fixture. This isn't the most avant-garde, but it's cleaner, and it's not so 1970s.
Right.
I love the 70s. It was great. Okay, paint bathroom tiles, remove wallpaper. So, the kitchens and the baths are really where you see houses being outdated. And the reason why is you have a lot of fixtures. They're hard to change. They're expensive. It's a big commitment. And so that is usually where people are giving that little facelift, whether you're a seller and you want to make more money selling. You might paint the kitchen cabinets. We also do that for the bathroom. And so here's an example of a lot of these bathrooms that are outdated. They have blue tiles all over, or pink tiles, or green, or a lot of pastel colors. And they have it in the floor too. It's hard, you can't really do much about the floor, but you can actually paint the tiles. And again, this may not be your 20-year fix, but you're just trying to buy a little time here, or maybe it's fine and you just want it more neutral. So now the painting companies actually make a bonding primer that you can paint on the tiles, and we do this all the time for the listings that we have, and it looks really clean, and then you can just jazz it up with your shower curtain, or your towels, or your art, or whatever you do. But at least your kitchen, your bath looks a little more cleaned up.
Here's another example.
Yeah, this is
Back to
great.
that
And that's not real marble.
No, right.
Just for the record. That's Formica, and it got painted, as did everything else, but the floor pretty much, right? And just changing out things like fixtures, the light switches. But even here you have the old towel bar.
Yep,
it's not fancy, but it's clean.
And did you say it'll tide you over for a few years until you got the finances or the time, the inclination to actually tidy it up?
Same thing, fresh paint, and then carpeting, just replacing carpeting. Sometimes we're putting laminate floors down, or people were doing that, especially in basements. We're seeing that where there used to be a lot of carpets in the basement. People are replacing that with laminate that is really faux wood. Looks nice. People put air carpets over it, warm it up a little bit. Very cost-effective material.
Yep, great solution. Exteriors too.
So exteriors, you gonna give us the review?
Yeah, why not?
So this is a case of paint again on the trim, and it just freshens it up. Painting the doors white. It's really nothing fancy. It's just cleaning it up. And then the other thing that helps in this case is taking out the overgrown bushes in the front. It just makes it look fresher and newer. So, and of course the season here is green grass, Marcus. Let's admit the grass helps.
The grass
too.
helps as well. But here's another one. Both are, back to that removing the shrubs. Here's another great example of just tidying it up.
Yeah. And this one, I think the other thing about overgrown, so the one I saw today in Arlington really did look much more overgrown than this. It was astounding how much overgrown bushes were. It was taking over the entire front yard. Mm-hmm. And it's a gorgeous house. And in this case, here, this seller planted these two small sort of ornamental trees in the front. And what you always say is that, people love new construction, and they love to come to a home that just has a few sprightly young trees and bushes in the front. But it just gives that sense of like clean and open to the house.
The other thing I remember about this house is that those trees made it really dark.
Yeah,
that's the key. You walked into the house and it felt dark, and this didn't feel inviting at all. Once those trees are taken away, as you can see in the after photograph there, all of a sudden the light came right back into the house.
Yeah.
And that was the key difference between the before and after here. The light that brought into the house, because nobody wants to live in a darker home. The light coming in was great. So lots of ways, relatively cost-effective ways too, to go from a not very nice looking home to something that in many cases will suffice for a few years, allowing you to get into the town. And then guess what? Step it up, change the kitchen, change the bathrooms when you got the time or the inclination to do.
Yeah,
so,
the key word there that I kept hearing you say was paint.
That's it. Paint is it. Paint is the key.
It's
Most
incredible,
of what you've seen is
if
paint.
you can just do a round of paint on a house that's outdated, it makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. So, strategy 1 or strategy 2, but at some point I need to kind of search for the home that I'm looking for. So how, what's the best approach in actually to do that, to kind of which town should I look at? There's clearly a lot. You mentioned before that towns are very different from one another. Towns which are, in fact, the towns next door to each other.
Totally.
Very different. Arlington, Lexington, Arlington, Belmont, for example. So smart search.
Yeah, so engage a buyer's agent, get the professional on your side, and do not waste a lot of time. Sometimes people are sitting out of the market when they actually could be starting to look and get their bearings straight. So get your buyer's agent going, discuss sort of the parameters of what you're looking for, get to know each other, let your agent understand what it is that you want, but also like your lifestyle, how you live, because a lot of the stuff that you might know, they don't know, and it's going to inform sort of the neighborhoods that make sense for you, sort of your lifestyle things. And then get your pre-approval just so you can understand what price point you're at, and then set up a search. And so the search is going to be narrowed down to, typically we like it when it's one town because it makes it pretty singular and focused, and you can really get things done when you're on one town. But if you have a few towns, that's okay too. It's just harder to, when the inventory really gets bigger and later in the spring, you start having a lot of choices. It's very hard to sift through all of that. We can set you up with the MLS. So let me just take a moment to explain what MLS is. So MLS is the database that agents enter their listings in, the homes that are coming on the market. And so it's purely a database about the home. And so agents have access to that database, as does Zillow, Redfin, Trulia, all the websites that are on the real estate agent sites. The difference is that they put it sort of in their format. Sometimes they miss information, including like attachments on listings. And so when you work with the buyer's agent can send you all of those things. And so the MLS search that we set up for you, it's really it's much more targeted than what you're going to get on one of these popular websites. And it's not going to include always some of the information they actually have on some of those websites. It doesn't include the public record for the home, but it really goes pretty deep specifically on that home. And so one can set up that search for you, and you get the new listings every day in your email, which is helpful. And so to get to those towns, we're looking sort of statistically where can you buy, but then we're also talking about your lifestyle and where do you want to live and your commute and all those things. And then if you're not from this area, or if you're, say, a couple and you're looking, which this happens sometimes, one person might be local and the other person is from out of state. And so the towns make sense to one person, but the other person actually doesn't know the area. And so they need to go around and get a sense of like what town works for them. So you need to research the towns. And then the neighborhoods start to get more specific, and people have taste on that. And you can keep going, more macro, more
right. One thing experience I have on this one is buyers, when they initially start, have a very broad set of towns they're looking at. 5, 10 towns, exactly as you said. The spring market comes along, and all of a sudden they've gone from 5 or 6 homes coming on a week to 10 or 20 homes coming on a week, and it just becomes overwhelming. And so there really is this step at which you need to begin to narrow down those towns. Exactly based on the criteria you mentioned, Corinne, but narrow it down so it becomes a manageable number. Otherwise, it just becomes overwhelming.
Absolutely.
Certainly when you get into a May time frame, it just becomes overwhelming.
Totally. And another reason why it's really important is that the cycle is pretty much a 5-day cycle. So, at least in Arlington and Lexington, homes come on the market generally on Thursdays, sometimes Wednesdays, someday Friday, but pretty much Thursdays. And so a lot of those homes have offers due on Monday or Tuesday, pretty much. And so what happens is when you have too many, you have to sift through all of those and then go see them all. You don't have time to actually put your offer together. And then some of them actually don't have deadlines, and you need to keep track of all of this stuff. So if there's a home that you really like, you can't be sifting through 50 homes. You've got to target to that 1 or 2 and make sure you're getting in on Friday because they don't have a deadline, and someone might be putting in an offer Friday night.
Right.
So
that's key.
These are...
And you mentioned the other day that you this evaluation, every time homes come on the market, you're looking at evaluating those homes for clients, giving them information about their home, the layout, does it work for them? So that's kind of your activity on a Friday, going through what's going on in the market.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have, we used to have the broker, before COVID, we did broker open houses, and the agents would run from house to house to house just to kind of check them out. We know that the pictures, I wouldn't say they lie, but they omit information. You can go to a house and all of a sudden you realize, like, hey, they didn't show me that, some feature of the home that, of course, was the biggest negative. They didn't include it all in the listing. And so it's good to check that kind of stuff out. But then also when there's similar homes, that look very similar, which is the one that actually is better condition, has a couple of things.
Yep.
Because in these towns sometimes, for instance, like capes, there's lots of capes around here, and they're all sort of built out over time in different ways, and some of them are improved over time, and some of them are just like run into the ground with their layouts and stuff. It's interesting. So choose 1 to 3 towns, and then get your search, and then start honing in on it.
Right, absolutely. And work with the buyer's agent to evaluate those homes. And it's true in both cases, competitive, or if you've chosen the competitive strategy, or you want to do the HGTV strategy, if you like. Important to evaluate each of those homes. And I think this is where Zooms come. Everybody knows how to Zoom now. All of the agents in the team are actively working with buyers Thursday and Friday on Zoom, planning the weekend, which we didn't used to do before. Before we would look at many more homes, but now there's this great opportunity with the tools that we have to evaluate the homes with a client on Zoom over the weekend, showing them the floor plan, explaining, the pros and cons of each of the homes.
Yeah, and I feel like when you do that, the buyer might want to see 8 homes, and when you actually go through just the listing alone, and you're kind of explaining what we see as agents, because we see so many homes, all of a sudden 4 or 5 are out, and it's down to 3.
Right.
And so you could have been running around on a Saturday looking at 8 homes, and instead now you're looking at 3 or 4 quality homes going in with a little bit clearer head. It's not so confusing. When you're looking at a lot of houses back to back, it's really easy to get confused.
Right. Where was the bathroom? Was that house number 1, or was that house? Yes.
Right. You can't
All
remember.
being there, right,
I mean, even for us, it's hard, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Yep. So it's a great narrow it down over the early part of the weekend over Zoom. So we can show you give you all the pros and cons, and then it makes that weekend a much more targeted activity.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's, if you're in the town where you're looking or close by, sometimes just doing a drive-by will eliminate certain homes. So if they come on the market on Thursday and it's a nice Thursday night, the days are getting pretty long, just get in your car and hit all the addresses, and you probably will eliminate a few just by driving by. Right.
You can also use some data to do this. It doesn't all have to be looking at homes, and specifically around bringing towns in, excluding towns. And I like the distribution data as a way to do that. So if you look at, just happens to be the sales distribution for Arlington. If you're in a price point of 700,000, Arlington's a great town. Let me show you the next town out, which is Lexington. That 700,000 drops dramatically. So you've gone from 72 potential homes in the course of 12 months of a year, all the way down to 27. And so this is a great way to include or exclude towns. You can do it based on 700, you could do it based on 2.5 million. Arlington perhaps not the right town if you're looking at those kind of price points. So there's lots of information that Corinne and the agents on the team can walk you through to begin to kind of bring those towns in, just based on, does it make sense to have a search set up there?
Totally. And I think also some towns are just small. And so, if you're looking at how many homes sold in a year and we just do a quick sweep of what happened, this is where agents can manipulate the data from MLS. That's what Marcus does when he downloads all this information. He's creating, these reports from it. And so agents can actually do that for your specific search. So if I have someone who's looking for, a ranch, let's just say, and they want to be in a certain circumference around their work, I can tell them, hey, there were X amount in this town for, 5 to 600, this many for 6 to 700 in ranches, and I can really go pretty deep on like a specific statistic. Right. So sometimes I'll do that with Arlington. Well, how many 3-bed, 2 baths versus 1 bath were they? When someone's putting an offer and they want to understand, how common it is. And so some of these towns are really small, and so if you have your heart set on being out in
Lincoln.
Lincoln or Bedford is a small town. There are a few really small towns, and at certain price points there's almost nothing. So yeah, look at that town, but start to have an understanding that if you're looking for really that needle in the haystack, you're going to be looking for a long time. So you have to put it with your motivation, your timing. Like, do you need to be in your house by the end of August because of school starting next year, or are you fine with waiting a couple years because you're downsizing and you want something quite specific and there's not the urgency perhaps?
Right. Yeah. So lots of information. Talk to the buyer's agent can talk you through that, but using that information to do that. So I've done all of that. I found the house.
Now what?
Now what, right? When it gets serious. Right?
Okay, so you found the house, and now comes the fun part. This is a blast. We love offer process. So let's just go through what the process is. Some of you have never bought a home, and if you haven't, if you have, perhaps you've forgotten. So once your offer is accepted, we're going to go through who's involved, what's involved, and a little bit of the money and the timing. So once you have an accepted offer, typically you're putting a deposit down. It's called a good faith deposit, and it shows that you're in. And typically that's $1,000, and that's due when your offer is accepted. So you're signing, the seller's signing, and it's actually not a true agreement until they receive the check. They can actually sell the house to someone else if you don't bring in the money.
That's right. It's a contract. Contract needs two people to agree, and it needs consideration.
Some cash, Marcus.
Yep, that's what it needs.
Okay. And then once you're under agreement, typically, well, I don't know, let's not talk typically, let's just talk about the standard format. This is the standard American or Massachusetts format, let's say.
Massachusetts,
and in Massachusetts, some towns are hotter. Boston is a hot area. There are other areas where things sit on the market for 6 months. And so let's just talk about the process, and then we'll talk about what happens when you get a little bit more competitive market. So typically once your offer is accepted, you are having an inspection, and you have an inspection contingency, and it allows you to have an inspection of the house and get back to the seller and let them know if there was any problems that you found. And so we choose these dates and put them in your offer. And so typically you're giving 5 to 10 days for the inspection process and to get back to the seller with what the issues were. So then you're going to bring an inspector, and an inspector is an independent person. You're paying them, anywhere from $500 to $1,000 depending on the price of the home. And they're going to generate a report, and that report, they carry liability insurance, so if they make a mistake and something happens and you buy the house and it's a major problem, you can actually sue them, which they probably don't want me to tell you that, but you can. But it's also a manual for how to, if you end up buying the house, which is usually what happens, it's also a manual for how to maintain the house. It's about all the different systems and everything. So the inspector's report is what, like 30, 50 pages? It is a booklet, and it's got pictures in there and everything. It's kind of fun. Depending on what you find. And then at that point, your inspection contingency allows you to either move forward, back out of the agreement if it's not the house you want, and it could be for any reason pretty much, or you can negotiate. So say you love the house, but there's $15,000 worth of problems that you couldn't have foreseen. You can negotiate with the seller, and maybe they'll give it all. Maybe it's an agreement and you share the burden. It just kind of depends on what the situation is. If you exit the agreement because you don't want to buy the house, you get your deposit back. But that's the inspection phase. And once you and the seller have negotiated all this out, now we really understand what the deal is between you and the seller. And so that's where the next step comes in. That's the purchase and sale agreement. And this is when the lawyers get involved, and they're going to take the agreement, and they're going to add in anything that came out of the inspection. So maybe they're fixing something about the house and it has to be done before closing, or maybe they're giving you some money back to do the work after closing. But the purchase and sale usually takes the lawyers 1 to 3 days. I see it more 3 typically. 3 days after the inspection contingency. And at that point, that's when you're starting to put some serious skin in the game. You're coming up with 5% of the purchase price minus that deposit that you put in. And the attorneys, they vary in cost. We have recommended attorneys. You do want to work with a mass real estate attorney. I think we're going over that later. Typically that attorney is the same one who's going to do your closing. That's what we see 99% of the time. Yeah.
Most of the time.
So that's the purchase and sale agreement. But if you're paying cash, then you would have a closing attorney
Right.
Still, you would still have one. They just wouldn't necessarily be representing the lender as well.
Right. What's key here, I think, is that you need 5%. And this surprises some buyers, I think, because if you think about it, 5% is $50,000 per $1 million sale. And so it's key, if you haven't got the money, if the money's not in the country, get that done up front, because if, for example, you don't have an inspection, we'll talk more about that in a minute, from accepted offer to purchase and sale can be as close as 3 days.
Yeah.
Even with an inspection, it could be as 7 to 10 days.
Right.
It's really, it moves quite quickly. So
and it's hard to get the money to move sometimes. People are shocked when they realize what's involved.
Right. Having to
bringing
move
it
that.
over. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
And deals have fallen apart because of that, basically.
Purchase and sale, that's the next. And then we get to applications.
This is where you apply for your mortgage. And so in your contract, there's actually a date we put in, the mortgage application date. And why that's important is if something happens and you don't get your financing, they will go back and say, did you actually apply right away, or were you dilly-dallying? And so you have to move on that. And so you'll have time before the P&S, after the inspection's done, before the P&S, to look for the lender that offers the best rates or the best product for you. That's who you're going to work with. So by the time the P&S is signed, the next day you are putting your application in with that lender. And then the mortgage contingency date is the date at which you are going to tell the seller whether you got your financing or not. And so everyone is kind of keeping an eye on that date. You've got your lender, your attorney, your agent. You're all looking at it, making sure that the bank is hustling, doing their part to figure this out, so that you have that. It's called a mortgage commitment letter. It's the lender is committing to show up at the closing table with the funds for you to hand over to the seller to buy the house. And so that's usually 4 weeks later. You can make it a little bit tighter, but it does get sticky, especially right now because the rates are so low. So we're seeing a lot of activity from people who are doing refinancing, and that's actually still happening. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big bottleneck last year. We were having a lot of challenges with lenders who, were having problems getting the appraisals. And, COVID complicated it some for sure, but still it was a bottleneck. So to go back to the process, Marcus, I digress. So once you put your application in, it's usually about 4 weeks until you have that mortgage contingency date. And this is important date. If the bank denies you the financing and you tell the seller by your mortgage contingency date, you get your full deposit back. And remember, that's no small amount. That's 5% of the purchase price. Right. If you get your financing, you cannot back out. So you're moving forward, but everybody wants to move forward. You bought this house, you love it. But if you're denied again, you can back out and your deposit is refunded. And then about 2 weeks later, it seems sometimes it's 7 to 14 days, I would say, is closing. And that is when the remaining balance is due. So some people are, 10% down, some people are 20% down, some people are 50% down, some people are paying the whole thing in cash. That, together with the money that's coming from your lender, is what's being handed over to seller. And that is a process of signing a lot of papers and a lot of back and forth. And that's about 14 days later. And so the whole process to buy a home, from when you find it, put that offer in and get accepted, to when you close, if you're doing an inspection and you're doing a mortgage, is typically 7 to 8 weeks. Mm-hmm. If for some reason you're not having an inspection, which there are reasons why you might not have one, and we will go over that, that would be more like a 6-week closing. So you have to kind of plan ahead a little bit. Like if you want to move in, say, before... I don't know, maybe you have a lease and it ends at the end of August and you want to be somewhere, you need to really go under agreement probably first week in July latest to guarantee that you're in. No, that's true. Beforehand. And if you're going to do some work on the house before you move, then you've got to anticipate that time too. Throw that one in too. But yeah, that's kind of 6 to 8 weeks is key. It does take time. The mortgage is the longest piece within that. So you talked a little bit about the inspection, but it is kind of pretty tough, the inspection. What are some strategies you might follow or you might do within that inspection to make your offer acceptable? So first, let's talk about why the inspection is so important to the seller. So the inspection contingency it creates a risk on the part for the seller because you actually can get out of the agreement. And so when a seller comes on the market, they're only new to the market once. And that's the time when they're going to make the most money, because the buyers will see it for the first time. The most motivated buyers are going to bid on it. You get one shot. And so if for some reason you buy the home, or you go under agreement on the home with an inspection, and for some reason the deal falls apart, they have to go back on the market. And every buyer looking at the house will see that you are back on market. And so the first question that they're going to have is, why? What happened? Was it something with the house? And so instead of walking in the house and feeling like, wow, this house is amazing, I love this house, it's everything, they're going to walk in and they're going to say, wow, this house is amazing. They're like, what could be wrong with it? And they start looking around, and
right.
you know, we all do it, right?
Yep.
You start to wonder, like, what's the story? And so that inspection is really risky. And so what's happening in competitive markets is that some buyers are waiving the inspection contingency so that the seller assumes no risk. And that is, so let's just go through some of these strategies. So I'll go through what they mean, but yeah. So the traditional one would be to request an inspection.
Yep.
And that's generally when it's a balanced market, you know, or if it's
or
a
not competitive
if it's
town.
right, or if it's a buyer's market. Yeah, you're of course you're going to get an inspection, and you have that option to change your mind. The second option would be waive the inspection, and we're seeing that quite frequently a lot in these competitive towns.
Right?
And it's really risky. I don't think you ever want to buy a house without checking it out. You need to kick the tires. Waiving the inspection as part of the offer process doesn't mean that you can't have an inspection. So what we're advising for people who want to waive the inspection to be more competitive is to have an inspector come in before the offers are due to check out the house. What you lose is you lose your ability to negotiate over problems that are found in the inspection, but you also know what the house is. And so for a seller, when they're looking at two offers and one of them is, say, I don't know, let's just throw out a number. One of them is $20,000 less than the highest offer, but the one that's $20,000 more is requesting an inspection, and that person doesn't really know about their house. Maybe their maintenance is a little deferred, or they just don't know, or maybe they know there's a problem but they haven't disclosed it, and they know that they're kind of sitting there at this risk. They're likely going to choose the offer that's less money, so that they don't have to deal, because they know they're going right to purchase and sale. And that's a great feeling when you're a seller, to just go right to P&S.
Right.
The inspection,
you go from all the way to 5% down, which really does kind of lock the buyer in at that point.
yeah, and a lot of times when they're accepting an offer on, Tuesday, you're at P&S by Friday, so they don't have too long to be sweating it. They're at P&S and they're psyched.
Yep.
So that's waiving the inspection. And like we said, you can do an inspection. Typically, the cost on that, I always say it's about $600 for a single family home around here. If it's a bigger home, it might be more. We do have people who do consults. It's a little less, it's less money. You don't get the report, but they're basically looking at the house and making sure you're not buying a lemon. They're identifying big ticket items, but they're not looking at the little stuff, because most homes aren't perfect, especially when you're buying most homes around here are not new, so that's true. So you eliminate your risk with that pre-inspection, but you incur a fee. And when it's really competitive, it's really hard, because you almost can't get a house without waiving the inspection for some really hot homes in certain towns. And so I consider it more a transaction cost. It's just a process that it's going to mean you actually get a house. It's the difference between looking for years and looking and getting a house.
That's right, yeah.
So, and then the third one is sort of a hybrid, and it's increase the deduction on the deductible on an inspection, and that's a shared risk. So an example would be that the buyer agrees to cover the first $10,000 that are brought up in the inspection, and then anything over that is negotiable. And so that just means you're not going to be nickel and diming them, basically. And so that's okay, and that works well. And specifically, I find when you're at lower price points, if you're at, in a town where condos are like $300 to $400, the price of an inspection for someone who's on a lower budget ends up being more prohibitive. So what I find is the higher price the home it is, the easier it is for people to waive the inspection. And it's also easier for them to waive the inspection, because if there is a problem, it's kind of a risk that they can take, and they can actually, if they lose on that risk, they can actually cover the loss, because they can fix whatever problems are found.
They can fix it, right?
You know, and so for someone who's on a really tight budget, how are you waiving the inspection? How are you paying for an inspection? And then how are you covering whatever comes up? So those are all sort of part of it too.
So there's a lot to the inspection, clearly. Corinne's given you an overview, really, not much more. There's a lot of, and it differs as you mentioned, by town, by house, by buyer, what buyers, how much risk they're willing to take on. So all of those things kind of play in terms of which is the right strategy. It's not a one size fits all. Always waive it, always have it. You evaluate each home as you go through, and kind of come up with the right strategy depending on all of those criteria. So inspections, a lot to it. There's a lot to financing as well, I guess. I mean, how do you at some point somebody has to pick up the tab, and what are the things to think about when it comes to financing? Yeah,
so let's just go over a few terms, because I think these are basic and it's important to understand the loan to value ratio. And so it's how much are you borrowing? So that's a term you're going to hear a lot. How much are you borrowing compared to the sale price of the home? Obviously, the higher the down payment, the stronger the offer. And the higher the down payment, the lower the risk to the bank, but also to the seller. So let's talk about the next part, which is how I want to put the two together. So the home value. So say you're borrowing 80% on a home, and you offer, let's just say $1 million for easy numbers. If you offer $1 million, but the house appraises at $900,000, the 80% that they're going to lend you is not on the $1 million. It's actually going to be on the number that the appraiser came up with. Now, usually it's not that far off, but that difference between you have to show up at the closing table with the $1 million, and so whatever they lend you, do some quick math. 9 times 8, 72.
There you go.
720. So in that case, you would have to show up with 280 instead of 200. And so that 80 is called the appraisal shortfall. And so when a seller's or the seller's agent are looking at your offer, when a house is going way over in these competitive towns, and we actually don't know what it's going to appraise for, sellers want to make sure that you are going to be able to close. And so they need to make sure that you can afford to cover an appraisal shortfall. So if you're a 10% buyer, you're tight on money. If you're putting 20% down, that's a little stronger, that's great. If you're 30%, you are more likely to be able to absorb the difference on that. 40%, better yet, right? And so when you are in a competitive offer situation, what happens sometimes is they will say, we like your offer, it's a great offer, but we would like you to sign this, which says that you can cover any appraisal difference, or they might split it up a certain way, like it has to appraise for a certain amount, and anything, if it appraises that amount or over, you agree to cover that amount. And so the appraisal is how the bank determines how much money they're lending you. So that's a really basic idea that I think a lot of people miss.
No, that's true. You really need to consider that, especially in a competitive environment. If it's not competitive, most homes will appraise well, but in a competitive environment where buyers are being forced because of competition to pay more, it's much more likely that appraisal issues may arise.
Yeah. So, and then when you're financing, the mortgage contingency is dependent on the appraisal, but also on your income and your assets. You don't want to rock the boat. If you lose your job, that could be unsettling. And
don't buy a car.
Don't buy a car.
Before closing. After closing, you buy whatever you want.
Exactly.
Don't before closing.
Don't
buy
too
a
much
car
fun.
before closing. That's for sure.
And then, don't do anything that's going to alter your credit score.
Right.
Sometimes these things lie in a delicate balance, and if you just pull one thing, the house falls down.
That's true.
The deal falls apart, so to speak.
Indeed.
So that's the financing aspect.
Not quite. Closing costs.
You can do this one.
Me? Like the closing costs?
You do closing costs.
That's a question that many people ask is, so what additional costs do I have to buy a home? And the one that clearly comes up is closing costs. Key thing here is there are numerous closing cost calculators online you can use, which will give you a broad sense of what that number will be. What I've been told as you talk to lenders is the lenders have a more accurate, will get a more accurate number on that. So that's one of the questions you're going to be talking to your lender about as you're kind of deciding which one to use. What will those closing costs be? Because there are things like the lender fees, homeowners insurance, clearly, title insurance, some stamp tax and so on. There are some additional costs. And another reason why it's important to have some money in reserve. Don't push yourself to the limit because closing costs will come up. They are not huge in Massachusetts. They're larger in many other states, but it's still a sizable amount of money you need to think about. So look at those numbers online just to give you a sense of it. But then as you begin to kind of hone in on a lender and a house for that matter, because many of these costs are dependent on the house you buy, talk to your lender to find out what those closing costs are. You know, and back to what we said before, maybe bring back, you may be pre-approved for $1 million, but bring that back a little bit. Give yourself some leeway, one, to offer a little bit more than a home that's on the market for $1 million, but also to give yourself some leeway to pay for some of these additional costs. That's kind of key.
You know, and sometimes people are just looking for an index, and, you know, I've heard that it can get up to 1 to 1.5% of the cost of a house. So if you're talking about a $700,000 house, maybe the max would be $10K.
Yep, could be.
It depends. And so one of the things that's added in this, actually you went over that. So yeah, good. So that's closing costs. Yep.
So you need an attorney in Massachusetts. Sorry about that. You just can't do it yourself. If only we could, but no. You do need an attorney. That's kind of key here. In fact, you have 2 attorneys. That always surprised me, actually, I have to say.
Yep. So they represent the buyer, they represent the bank, and oftentimes they do both together. We have recommended real estate attorneys. We love recommending them, and the reason why is they are great. And when we work with attorneys that the buyer brings in, or sometimes even the seller, it's kind of a crapshoot. I hate to say that,
it is. No, you're right.
But it's like you really need an attorney that is responsive and that is a clear communicator. It makes a huge difference. And additionally, the laws are regional. They need to know Massachusetts law, and they have to be a real estate attorney. Sometimes people say like, oh, you know, this relative is going to help me out, and it ends up being more trouble than it's worth. You save maybe a little bit of money, but the heartache or the challenge and some of this stuff, this legal stuff, you can really get into problems. I mean, it's a big deal, and there are big problems if you aren't doing it correctly. Yeah,
but real estate attorney is the key one. Please use a real estate attorney. If there's one piece of advice to take away from this whole seminar, please use a real estate attorney. It does go much, much smoother. It's a stressful exercise anyway for everybody, but having a real estate attorney makes it go much, much smoother. So, COVID. So, work in progress, clearly, but what's your experience of buying during COVID?
So, COVID, I mean, it really is a microcosm of society. I feel like everybody has learned how to deal with buying and selling in the time of COVID, and it's changed. So in the beginning, there was a lot of sort of gloves and masks and sanitizer and booties, and now I would say it's pretty much down to people using sanitizer, taking their shoes off or putting on booties and having the mask, which sounds the same, but for some reason it feels more normalized.
It does a little bit, doesn't it?
It does. It sounds like it's just these. I think we're just used to it, but it does feel normal. People social distance. We go into houses. There's always space. Typically, for me and for a lot of people on our team, we try to avoid the open houses because you can make private showings. And the great thing about private showings is you're the only people in the house, you get your distance, you have your time. There are open houses. We do open houses occasionally. There are open houses. The open houses that are announced way in advance, they tend to be flooded with people. And so the problem with that is that you end up waiting in line. And then when you get in, you have this energy coming from the agent, like, okay, everybody kind of keep on moving. And so, you're making a big purchase. It's nice to go in and not feel hurried when you're looking at the home. Oftentimes you get that one shot to look at a home and that's it. But I would say the open houses are pretty much managed okay once you're in it, because people are aware, so they're keeping distance. So you of course get these random people who aren't observing social distancing, and you don't know where you're going to find them, so you'd have to be aware of it. But by the same token, I would say it seems to be okay. I would say the biggest problem with the open house is the hurried feel and the waiting in line.
Right, and if there are multiple people in there, you're more worried about the people around you than you are looking at the home.
Right.
And so private showings is the key, I think.
Absolutely.
For us anyway, private showings.
They're so much better, and I think the other thing about them is you can just talk freely about the house, and when you're in it,
right.
you know, you're really looking at it. It's nice.
So finally, what is our commitment to a buyer out there?
So yeah, we love working with buyers. We love working with our sellers too. It's a really fun job that we have. You know, people are buying something that has real stakes, and it really impacts the quality of their life down the road. And then just to be able to be helpful on a transaction that is so complicated, to be there with the resources and knowing how to help them and guide them is huge. And so when we work with you, one thing that I feel is really important is to educate the buyers, that they understand the market and they understand what they're buying and understand in the context. We understand it a lot more because we are sampling it for years, looking at this, looking at that. But they come in, they barely know the town, and they see a house and they don't even understand how it fits in the market. Like, is this actually a good opportunity or is it not? They don't actually know, and so they need you to give context to that purchase. So we do that. We guide you on the financing options. We help you find those great homes that fit your needs. And I will say every buyer has different needs. There is no cookie cutter thing, even though sometimes you think the houses are the same. They all vary, and it is really the variation is in the buyers.
Right.
And you know,
true. We should emphasize we should put your in uppercase there, as you were kind of saying that. It's really is about the needs of the buyer, as you say.
Yeah, your needs.
They're all unique.
Yeah, for sure. And then, you know, we do simple things, but it can be complicated because you have to go in and book these things, and they're booked up. So it's like being a crazy travel agent. We have to arrange showings for you. And then once you find a house or two that you really like, we evaluate that property. So it's looking at the actual house, the housing stock, and helping you understand what it is. But then it's also evaluated in the context of the market so that you understand what it's worth and what you're willing to pay for it. And so strategizing the offer based on that evaluation makes for a much stronger offer because you have a confidence in what the house is worth. And I think, you know, that's where, especially for people, I don't even know how people who do not work with a buyer's agent, they just don't have that level of like nuance. And so they're doing a crapshoot. If they go too low, they miss the house. If they go too high, they overpaid. And so we're really trying to hit that fine line where you're not paying too much, but you're getting the house. That's sort of what we're trying to do. We're trying to narrow that gap. We're trying to eliminate waste, essentially. Wasting time when you're losing a house, but also wasting money when you're overpaying. Right. So we strategize the offer, negotiate, and then we advise you through the inspection, coordinating all those activities towards closing. And all of that is done, you know, we have a fiduciary responsibility. And so we try really hard to work on your behalf to be, you know, ethical, with integrity, to educate you along the way. And, you know, that's sort of what we always talk about, educate and teach you so that...
So that's our commitment.
Yeah.
To anybody.
That's it.
That's it.
That's it. That's pretty much it. So yeah, so I know that you know, there are a lot of buyers out there who are thinking about coming in on the market, and we are here, and we are happy to talk to you about what we can do when we work together. But it's always fun to hear what people are doing. Everybody's always doing something different. You know, they're looking for something different, different timetable, different challenges with financing. So it's fun. It's really fun.
Feel free, if I can say that, to reach out to Corinne. If you have any questions about what we've talked about in this last hour and 10 minutes, I guess. Lots of nuance. We've just given you a broad overview as best we can in the time available. There's a lot more detail to be had in all of this. So please reach out to Corinne if you have any questions about this.
Yeah, this is general. And from here you go into what do you want, you know, and that's really where the fun begins.
Yep.
That's when it becomes personal, and that's when we can actually make strides to make it happen for you. So thank you for listening. We really appreciate you stopping in. Thanks, Marcus.
Yep, thank you.
And enjoy your day and your night.
Bye.
Bye.